This is our league, and this is your league. Broadcasting from the 55-yard line in Japan to the shores of the Great White North and everywhere around the world on Gridiron America Radio and the Sports History Network.
When the end came, some teams had fewer than 3,000 paying their way in, and some of those were talent scouts from NFL teams looking for players to stock their rosters. Why didn't it all work out? There are a number of answers. The WFL started up just as the nation's economy turned down, and the millionaires bankrolling the teams decided that the way to remain millionaires was to cut their losses.
The governors of the World Football League have determined that this enormous capital expenditure, in light of an unstable economy in our nation, continuing inflation, no assurance of national television revenues, and a softening market for new leagues and professional sports, was an unwise investment.
Probably most important, though, was the miscalculation that football-hungry Americans would eat up still more pro football. They didn't. They just chewed on the WFL for a while and decided that they didn't like the taste. Bill Plant, CBS News, New York.
Greetings, everybody, from Japan. It is a new episode of the From the 55-Yard Line podcast, and we have it's Dave and I tonight, and we have a gentleman here with us that I've been wanting to talk to literally for years. And as I've explained, I think in this podcast and then on my other podcast, Gridiron Japan, when I came to Japan, I had to get rid of a lot of football books, except the ones that didn't have a digital copy and I wanted to keep. So it's kind of, you got to make decisions when you move. Well, the books that I took with me to Japan about the World Football League, all of them were written by Mark Speck, the noted Pro Football Researcher Association member, prolific author. I can say that, right, Mark?
Yeah, I guess you can.
I mean, if there's the World Football League, how many books have you written?
Well, let's see. I started out with Todd Mayer doing the original WFL encyclopedia.
Okay.
Back in 2006, and it went pretty well, and it started to sell. And I got an idea because I always wanted to do a book about the Florida Blazers, who were in 74, never got paid the last 13 weeks of the season, came with a point of winning the championship. Always thought it was a great story. Did an article for the Coffin Corner on them. And I said, I'm going to throw this idea at my publisher. He said, yeah, great. Sounds good. So I did that one. And then I did another book on the whole league, which covered all the teams. And that was called Wiffle. And because that was the nickname for it, kind of derogatory nickname for the WFL, and did that one and did well, both with reviewers and with with sales. So after I took a sabbatical doing a book about a minor league football team from my state of Pennsylvania, and did that one, then I went back to the Detroit Wheels, who were another team that didn't get paid, but they didn't have as much success. They really had a lot of problems that were a lot worse, I think, than the Blazers. Folded after 14 games. A lot of guys didn't get paid. And again, that's been well received. So right now I'm working on two more, one on the San Antonio Wings and an updated version of the encyclopedia.
Oh, wow. And when are those going to be out? When are you looking at hopefully those coming out?
Well, I was hoping they were going to come out early this or last year, I should say. Now it's January of 24. I have the San Antonio Wings book is pretty much done, but COVID kind of hit. My publisher is just kind of a small mom and pop kind of publisher, St. Johann Press, and they really had took a hit with everything. Had a trouble with not being able to get the book, book sales, book presentations, that kind of thing. Things slowed down. So the Wings book is ready to go. It's On a Wing and a Prayer, the short turbulent flight of the San Antonio Wings. I always liked their story. I think it came out very well. There was I think what sold it to my publisher was a story about the one player it was identity theft in the WFL. He claimed he was Jack Pardee, and he called Perry Moss, the San Antonio Wings coach, said, "Hey Perry, I got this linebacker. He was a good guy, good prospect, but I can't use him. It's a numbers game. I can't, fit him in. If I'd be happy if you'd sign him. I think he'd be a good fit for your team." He goes, "All right." He sent him down. He said his name was John Meager, Meeger. And he talked to George Blankenship, who was the assistant coach for defense. And he said, "Where'd you go to school?" Western Lutheran University in Kentucky. And Blankenship had spent his life scouting in Kentucky, knew every school in Kentucky. This is the worst guy to see. I never heard of it. And he's stammering around. "Well, I went to North Carolina." Okay. Well, they looked all around there, couldn't find anything. He played in one game with the team, ticked everybody off. He ticked off Lonnie Warwick, who was their middle linebacker. It's not some guy to get ticked off, because he was the one that got in a fight with his own teammate, Joe Kapp, when they both were with the Vikings. So not a guy to try to tick off. And they were watching films, and they had just beaten or lost to the Philadelphia Bell, and he gave up like 200 and some yards rushing. And Meager stands up in the middle of the meeting and goes, "If I was playing middle linebacker, they'd have never rushed for that many yards." And Lonnie Warwick just sat there doing the slow burn. He's just like, "I was the middle linebacker in that game. It wasn't my." So he was, he went to, I think he went to Portland. They played there, and he played on special teams. And they came back. And they started, the players started to complain to Perry Moss about him. "I don't like this guy. He lies a lot. He tries to cause problems." And so he did some checking, and he said, "You're not going to Shreveport with us. You're going to stay here. I'm not taking you on the trip with you." Okay. So George Blankenship gets to Shreveport. No sooner gets in his hotel room, the phone's ringing. It's Meager calling him and saying, "Are you sure you don't need a linebacker? I can jump on a plane and come down." He goes, No, we're good." So he didn't play in that game. They came back. Perry Moss finally calls Jack Pardee and says, "Jack, why'd you send me this guy? This guy's nothing but trouble." And he goes, "I didn't send you anybody. I didn't call you." He's like, "Okay." So, he does some digging, and he says to the coaches, he goes, "Get him out of here. Get him out of here. Cut him." And this was like toward the end when the WFL was getting ready to fold. And he goes to a Jaguar dealership in town in San Antonio, writes a phony check, drives off with the Jaguar, goes to like New Orleans, and the cops are after him. FBI's after him. Turns out his name is really George Myers. He's been trying to get into join teams all over the country, Atlanta Falcons, the 49ers, disguising his voice as like different team officials and all this stuff. And they finally, I think they caught him. I never really did hear a resolution about it. Couldn't find one. But it was just an amazing story. The kicker, Ed Strickland, who was there, and he got cut the same day. He said, "I saw him once. He stayed with me, and he took off with a loaf of bread, half a jar of peanut butter, and a 6-pack. And I haven't seen him since." And I guess he got a Christmas card, he said, from him from down in South America. It was in mining or something or whatever. Who knows? But my publisher said, "Yeah, okay, we'll do the book. That sounds like a good story." So we'll do the book, I wrote an article. I think it appeared in the Coffin Corner about it. So I'm waiting for that one. It's set. The encyclopedia, I have overdone it with my research. The original encyclopedia was like 384 pages. Depending on the font size we use, it's either going to be 900 or 1,500 pages for this new one.
Oh, wow. Oh, well, you know what? That's going to be a huge shipping cost for me to get it to Japan. So hopefully,
Well, we've talked about making it a 2-volume set, like by
yeah.
year. One for 74, one for 75. I've got the chronology that I'm writing, and I'm still working on it, is 400 pages alone. That's longer than the entire first encyclopedia. I've got trades, signings, guys get cut, lawsuits, anything that I can come up with, any kind of milestone, any kind of happening that happened in the league from 73 all the way up to about 85.
Okay.
There was stuff
Well,
that happened.
well, the
So
thing
go
is
ahead.
with the,
Sorry.
oh, no, no. What the thing is with the World Football League, there is so much craziness that happened during those brief 2 years the team played, but obviously in everything that led up to it, with the teams being formed,
Mm-hmm.
with I mean, you start with Gary Davidson with
Yeah.
the whole genesis of the league, and how though I mean I read his book recently because it's one of those it was a vintage copy I got, and I go, well, I got to read this, and it was a beautiful library vintage copy, and
Right.
hearing his stories about how the league started. I mean, every team has its own crazy set of crazy stories. Like there's one person in particular when it comes to the World Football League that I love. I can never get enough of learning about, and that's the King.
I knew you were going to say that. I just knew it. He's the same. I feel the same. I feel the same way. He is just a personality. I mean, the guy just, he had talent. He really did. I think he would have been a good quarterback, except for the fact I think he was just really uncoachable. He just knew everything about football, and he ticked off every coach he probably ran into, except for Ron Waller, who coached him in the minor leagues and then with a Bell. He kind of got used to him and just kind of said, okay, King's being King, that kind of thing. But, he was just a personality that was unique. I mean, he played all around all the different teams, different leagues. He had a cup of coffee with the Patriots in 68, I think it was. He went to the CFL, played in with the Pottstown Firebirds. They've got that NFL Films, great film about that.
Oh yeah,
And then the follow up. I don't know if you've seen that one too.
yeah.
Just
I did
years
see the follow
later,
up.
which had him in there now as an Indian with the long hair, and he's going to Vegas to sing at the Miss America pageant or something. And he was like an Indian persona, some an Irish guy from Jersey. Now he's all of a sudden an Indian, and he just he'd come to the camp, with his customized Cadillac with the phone in it, and get a bullhorn out and go, okay, the King's here, the King's here, and he just was a very interesting guy. I mean, you had to love him. I think my favorite quote was the second year of the WFL 75 when they switched coaches, when Waller left and they brought in Willie Wood, who liked a more conservative game plan, whereas Waller was the wild and crazy sets and the formations and everything, and halfback passes and what have you. And Willie Wood was more conservative. So the two of them really didn't click because they had Bob Davis there, who was more of the conservative type of quarterback. So they kind of had a back and forth with who was going to start. And they had a game. I can't remember what game it was. And they were down at the 1 yard line. And King decides to run a quarterback sneak, gets stopped, comes back to the sidelines. And Willie goes, "What did you run, King? Quarterback sneak." He goes, "We don't have a quarterback sneak." He goes, "Well, I figured they wouldn't expect it because we don't have one." So it's just, but that's how he was. He just did things his own way. A lot of detrimental. Some of it was really good. Like I said, he was a talented guy. He just didn't fit that mold of, he was kind of short. I think it was about 5'10" or so. At the time they're looking for guys 6'2", 6'3", big strapping guys like Terry Bradshaw, that kind of thing. Dan Pastorini. And he was just a kind of a short guy. He had a great arm. He had a great football mind, but I think he just thought he was smarter than everybody, even his coaches. And he just did what he wanted to do. But he was just an amazing And then there was another thing there. I don't know if you remember that at the end of the '74 season, they were going to play the Chicago Fire in the last game of the season. Well, Chicago didn't want to play. They said it's meaningless. This game doesn't mean anything. We're not going to make the playoffs, and we're not going to win if we do make them. So we're going to forfeit. Well, King just went beside himself. I guess he had a clause in his contract that if he threw for so many yards or threw many touchdowns, he'd get a bonus. And he was just short of those. He said, "Come on, I don't care who we play. Just get us into the game. I want to play a game. Get us a game. I don't care what team it is. I don't care what league it is. Just get." He was just like that. He was, I've talked. I don't know if you ever met his son Jimmy.
No. I was going to ask you about. Have you talked to the family?
I have. It was a long time ago that Jimmy was around. I haven't seen him for quite a while. He was an interesting guy. He just, I think that he just accepted him as he was. He wasn't a really good dad. Wasn't there very much, but he didn't really have a lot of like an axe to grind. I mean, he just accepted him as what he was. He was just into himself, narcissistic, and that kind of thing. You could tell there was love there when he was being interviewed and talking to you that he did. He was just a unique guy, and that's what he would say. And that's how he was. But that was one of the things when I was thinking about, getting into the PFRA and writing a book. The first thing I was going between was the WFL or the USFL, because the USFL had just kind of folded shortly before this. So I was really torn. I was like, I got the USFL. I had the two USFL guides that they had, guides and registers from the Sporting News. It had all the games in it for the first 2 years. And I thought, this would be easy to do because you got all this stuff and a good jumping off point. But no, I'm going to do it the hard way and take the league that's 15 years old. There's nothing about it. And, there's no books on except for Herb Gluck's book.
Right.
And, so I just, I'll do the UFL or the WFL. So that's what I did. And, I started, the old microfilm machines in the libraries, going through them and, zipping through those till my eyeballs would implode and, just looking up old articles and stuff. And as I researched it, I really like you said, Greg, it's just the stories were just amazing. I mean, I know the USFL has some great stories. The books that Paul Reeves has written. I liked what's his name, Perlman's book.
Yep.
I know a lot of people don't. I thought it was okay. Again, it just did a little bit more of the kind of lighter side of it. It had a lot of stories, but WFL, I mean, guys not getting paid, teams, players moving in with each other and trying to, survive. And Mike McBath from the Blazers telling me on the phone that, we'd be sitting on the sidelines. You could look out and see them repossessing our cars in the locker room in the parking lot during the game. And they're standing there and they're like helpless, like, and guys getting their electricity turned off. Jack Pardee his wife takes a $20 bill to pay for some groceries, and I guess she wrote a check, and the manager followed her home, took the groceries, and we're not going to take this check. We think it's probably bad because you're with the Blazers, and Jack Pardee trying to buy something with a $20 bill, and the guy's looking at it like it's counterfeit. He's checking it out, and all this stuff. Just crazy stories. And Tommy Riemann eating McDonald's 3 times a day. He goes, I'll never eat McDonald's again. Never will eat McDonald's. I had it 3 times a day for the whole time I was in Orlando. And he goes, I just can't eat it anymore. So yeah, just great stories. And that's what steered me toward the WFL. And I haven't regretted it at all. With all those books I wrote, with the new ones coming out, I just, and people just can't seem to get enough of them. They're just like, are you going to write a book about the Sun? Are you going to write a book about the Bell? Are you going to write I'd love to write a book on every team. I really would. I think they would probably fill a book, every one of them, but I don't know if my publisher would, I might be a little bit WFL overload for him, but, I would gladly do it because there's so many great stories.
Well, and the thing is, you are the historian for the World Football League. Nobody else is. Herb Gluck, he unfortunately has passed away.
Yeah.
Gary, I always want to say Gary Daniels, Gary Davidson. I always, thinking of the Lions quarterback.
Yeah.
I mean, he's still around. You have
Yeah.
obviously our friend Upton Bell is still going strong,
Yeah.
and they've all written books,
Yeah.
about. But you're the king. I mean, literally, you are the king of you are the king of the castle when it comes to the World Football League.
I appreciate that, Craig. Thank you.
And I do, it's funny, talking about the Wiffle book. I brought that book with me. I was going to Hawaii for Navy training, and the intelligence center where I was working at was right next to Aloha Stadium. So every time I passed by there, had your book. I was reading up on the Hawaiians, and I was just, I'm such a football nerd. In the skiff where I worked at, it's like, yeah, it's
Right.
Aloha Stadium. I was talking the younger guys that were all football fans, obviously, had
Mhm.
no idea what the World Football League was, and
Oh
that there
yeah.
was even a team in Hawaii of all things.
Right.
So my next question is the Hawaiians.
Right.
What, of all the teams in the World Football League, there were really, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but if you talk about successful teams, there was only a select few. Were the Hawaiians really, would you consider the Hawaiians a successful World Football League team?
That's a good question. They got off to kind of a rough start because the people that were running it at the beginning were mainlanders, they call them,
Right.
and they came up with some really bad decisions, like same day broadcasts of home games. They would air them the same day in Hawaii. So people decided, you don't have to go. Why are we going out and sitting maybe in the rain or whatever it might be? I can watch it like 2 hours later on my TV. So they didn't do a lot of research. I mean, Hawaii, the population isn't quite enough to support a team, because I think they did a study that said that, to fill the stadium, and I think this was Aloha Stadium, 1 out of 14 people in Hawaii would have to be there.
Yeah, sounds about right.
So yeah, so it's not that it's not a, but their owners were good owners. I mean, Hemeter was the owner. Chris Hemeter, who turned out to be the president of the league, was there. Battistone, and they were pretty well heeled. They were very, good owners. They really tried to do a good job of having a successful team in Hawaii, because Hawaii was really, I don't think they had any teams except for the college there, the Rainbows, but they were there, and I thought they did a good job. They didn't really have a lot of money trouble because of the fact they were so well financed, but because of the fact that they had to stay in Honolulu Stadium, the old Termite Palace, for the first season and about half the second one, because Aloha Stadium, they had a lot of problems, a lot of delays with construction problems. They have one time they thought it was cursed, so they brought in like a shaman or something to do read a prayer there to say, because a couple of guys got injured. There was just things that took so longer because they were hoping to start the first season there, and Honolulu Stadium was small. The ticket prices were high. They finally wound up lowering them. But it's just the idea that, like I said, Honolulu Stadium wasn't that great. And then,
Right.
and another thing that they did, along with the same day airings of the games on tape delay, they also decided that they weren't going to play on Wednesday and Thursday with the rest of the league. They were going to play Sunday. Weekday football was not going to make it in Honolulu, so we're going to play on Sunday. We don't care what the rest of you do. So everybody had to play Wednesday, Thursday, except for Hawaii. So if you played a Thursday night game, say in New York, you had to fly to Hawaii in time to play again Sunday.
Oh,
Detroit,
wow.
Yeah, I think Detroit was
Yeah.
the first team that had to go there and do that. And then another thing was on the East Coast, because of that, you couldn't really broadcast games because the games didn't start till midnight, because
Right.
you're in the East Coast.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that, they started out poorly the first year, but then they picked it up. They got a lot of NFL guys that got cut, a lot of the NFL guys that got released right before the season, started there in the last cuts. A lot of guys that they had signed to future contracts. Um, they decided they were some that got released. They came right over because you know winter in Hawaii is a lot better than winter in New York or Buffalo or anything like that. That's why they signed so many guys, and they had so many guys who did eventually play for them. So they had Randy Johnson came in the quarterback for the Giants, and I think Ed Hargett was the other quarterback. He came from the Oilers, and some other guys that they got on defense, Jim Sniadecki and Willie Williams. Some guys are really top flight pros that what happened a lot was if they signed a future contract, they would just their NFL team would just cut them or send them to some team like Houston where they were losing every game, and that happened a lot to a lot of the players that signed future contracts. And I thought that was kind of short sighted and a little bit, I don't know, juvenile. I think, cut off your nose tackle to spite your face, kind of thing. And so the second half they made the playoffs. I mean, they had a great second half of the season, made the playoffs, beat Southern Cal in the first round of the playoffs real easy, about 32-14. Then he almost beat Birmingham in the second round. He lost only 22-19. So I mean, they did very well the second half of the year. The second year they got some, had a lot of the guys re-sign again. Winter and in the fall in Hawaii is a lot better than winter in Chicago or Green Bay or something. So guys are, hey, we're going over there, and so yeah, they had a pretty good team for a while there. They had Sonny Six Killer, one of the great names in football history, as far as I'm concerned. He was their starter for most of the year. They had Rico Casada from he went to Syracuse, I think it was, and he bounced around the CFL a couple times. But he came in, he was pretty good. And again, they had that nucleus. They had like John Wilbur, Ken Bowman, and a lot of guys that were NFL vets that that because they had started out the first year in '74 with, I think, 5 veterans on the whole roster of like 40 guys. The rest of them were all rookies. I mean, they started out with a lot of rookies at the first year, and they weren't a bad team. And it was a good organization. The second year, the owners again were pretty good. I don't think they had a lot of money problems. Not like some other teams. Until the very end, toward the last couple of weeks when they started to ask them to take pay cuts and that kind of thing. And the guys got kind of ticked off at that. And that last game against Southern Cal, they had to call Milt the Pineapple Holt, who was from Hawaii, who had played in the Ivy League. They cut him in training camp, but they called him up. He's working in the city office there in Honolulu. Called him and said, "Can you?" Because Six Killer and Casada both quit right there, like 3 days before the last game, because they had attended a meeting. The team voted, "We're not playing. We're not going to play this game. We're done." So Six Killer and Casada went home. They roomed together, and they didn't hear that there was a second meeting where they decided to play. So these two guys, they said, "Well, we're cutting you," which was kind of, again, short-sighted because now they don't have no quarterbacks. They cut their 2 quarterbacks. So this is leading to the idea of calling Milt the Pineapple Holt. That was his nickname. And he came in like the game was Sunday. He comes in on Friday. I think he had one practice with the team. So they call, where was he at? Jim Fossil, the Giants coach. He had been a quarterback and a coach with the Hawaiians in '74, but he left. He went to work for an air conditioning company. And that's what he was doing. They called him, said, "Hey, we need another guy. Can you come over here and fly over and, get into the play this next game with Southern Cal. All right, give me a round trip ticket and $500. I'll be there, because he was going to probably come right back. So he got there on Saturday. He doesn't even get to practice. So you've got two quarterbacks who had one practice between them, and they didn't win the game. Unfortunately, it wasn't one of those real feel-good stories. They had guys playing out of position. They had guys playing wide receiver. Then some guy was practicing. Chuck Detweiler, I think, another NFL vet, was practicing at quarterback just to be an emergency quarterback. Hadn't played since high school. He's a defensive back in the NFL and with the Hawaiians. So that's really when it hit, was that at the end. I mean, that did it with a lot of the teams, but before that, I really think they were, I mean, you got to consider that the travel expense. They had to go on road trips, I mean, they would have to go to like Florida, then play Jacksonville, then play, somebody. So then they'd head home. They'd be on the road for like 18 days, 21 days. And, when they had training camp, they trained in California so they could have, somebody to play when it was Southern Cal. They were at Riverside, and I think, where was the Hawaiians at? It was one of those UC campuses. And they were, they trained there, but it was just all these wacky kind of trips they had to make. And I think that's one reason why the NFL has never had a team in Hawaii. It's just too tough. I mean, they play the games in
the WAC, or what it was. It used to be the WAC. And they played the Pro Bowl there for years. Right.
And, they go to Europe now for 1 or 2 games a year. But to have a team like that, with that time difference and the traveling, I just don't know if they'll ever have a team there. I think that was probably the only chance that they're probably ever going to have. So, it was just I thought they were a decent organization, money wise with the owners. They just made some bad, decisions at the beginning when they had somebody else run the team until Hemeter and Battistone got there and started to run it, being, locals instead of these guys from on the mainland somewhere.
Yeah.
So, they were, they weren't too bad. So, and Gary Davidson, I know you've been asking me about it, mention his name, started the league up. This was his third try at a league. He was, helped there at the ground floor with the ABA, the American Basketball Association, 67. His role in that has been kind of, overemphasized, lately. He really wasn't in there very long. He was there. I think he had a piece of the Dallas franchise. He was coming into meetings trying to run the thing and, talking about, this and that. And George Mikan, who was the commissioner, finally said, "Who is that guy? He's standing up at these meetings and making all these rules and stuff. Who is that?" Gary Davidson. I don't know. Does he own any team? Well, not really. Okay. Mikan took him out in the hallway. Yeah, we'll see you. They didn't see him again. So, again, he was there a little bit at the beginning. But, because the ABA, was still around by 72, he decided to try hockey and started the World Hockey Association. That was a little bit more involved in that, obviously, I think. And even though he'd never seen a hockey game, couldn't figure out what the red line was or the blue line was when he went to a game with Crazy Bill Hunter, who was an owner of one of the Canadian teams. And he looks at Davidson and he looks at the other guys there and he goes, "Who the hell is this guy? He doesn't know anything about the sport. He's going to run the league." But again, after a year, it was 73. It was doing reasonably well. They were, not doing too bad. And then he got the idea, I'm going to take on the big fish in the pond. I'm going to take on the NFL. So he, decided to do that, announced, that, well, it's interesting. His WFL, the WFL I write about, was actually the third WFL in about a year. And, in my research in the spring of 73, somebody got together, it was like Oklahoma City or something, said he was going to start up a World Football League. Never really got anywhere. Then this other guy, Tony Rosano and Louis Goldman, they started out something they called the Universal. Well, they called it the World Football League, and they started, around August or something, July, making a lot of noise about all this, that, and the other thing. Turns out that John Bassett, who was kind of, one of buddies of Davidson, went to the Senate representative to the meeting that really announced this, and then had another player or not something player, another guy with him, and I can't remember who it is off the top of my head. And they went to the meeting, wrote down all this stuff, got all the information, went back to Davidson and said, okay, look at this. What do you think? This looks like a pretty good template for a league. They said, oh, okay, looks good to me. So Davidson found out that these guys were going to announce at a certain time in October of 73. He beat them to the punch, said, here's the World Football League. So now these guys can't be the World Football League because he's the World Football League. So they changed the name of their league to the Universal Football League.
I've not heard this story before.
And
wow.
Well, it gets interesting too. I mean, it's more interesting. But so they tried to move and have their own league. The World Football League was moving along, having meetings, announcements. Here's our our owners. Here's our where's our cities, that kind of thing. And so Rosano was like, and then because of this, Davidson had also moved up the timetable to 74 because his original idea was to have it start in 75. So the Universal League now said, well, we're going to start in 74. So then Davidson said he's going to start in 74. So, but the WFL, the real WFL, really got off to a good start, signing players, and Rosano really wasn't having much luck with it. And he wasn't making any headway because Davidson was kind of scarfing up all the potential owners. The economy back then in 73, 74 was really starting to go downhill. It was terrible. So you didn't have a lot of big money men that were willing to, throw some money into this. So he got them, and Rosano just kind of like, well, okay, we'll start in 75. No, I guess we're not going to start at all. So on top of that, then Rosano then calls Davidson and asks him for a job. And Davidson hired him to work in the league office and then sent him down to Jacksonville to run the Sharks. He was a front office guy with the Sharks. He must have saw a kindred spirit, I guess, and maybe felt bad about sabotaging the guy's plans. I don't know, but he went ahead and he started he ran there, and I think he was in with Chicago Winds in 75. But yeah, so he got started. Davidson, after he kind of beat this guy to the punch, they were making plans late 73, early 74. They had some, teams, leagues, or a city set up. Most of these guys, they were called franchise holders. They were just basically holding on to the franchise until somebody came and bought it from them. And so, you had Nick Maletti, you had Howard Baldwin from the WHA. They were all, Davidson's buddies. And so all these guys just got, franchises. They didn't pay for them. Hey, okay, you want Boston? Okay, you got Boston. He had Steve Arnold. He wanted a team in Tokyo. That was his first choice. But, he went over there. He did some, what do you call it? He did some, research, found out they really weren't into football over there. It was baseball, soccer, that kind of thing. They played it at high school and college, I guess. And so they, he gave up that idea. That was about as far as it got. And they also had Bob Wolf, the agent at the time. He did it like a European tour of going to different places and what have you. And, he went over to Dublin, Ireland, Rome, London, talking to investors, possible investors back at, at that time. I think it was just kind of like a vacation. I don't know if they were really serious. But he went around and did all that. But, Steve Arnold, then he went to Memphis and didn't have any luck there because Memphis was still on the short list for the NFL to expand. So they didn't want this guy in here. They wanted the NFL. They hosted a WFL or an NFL exhibition game for many years there in Memphis, really wanting an NFL team. So they kind of, ignored him. And like you'd said earlier, Greg, that teams move so much, at the beginning of the, like 73, 74, it was just amazing. I mean, you had Florida, which started out as Washington, Baltimore. It was like a regional franchise. They couldn't get a lease with the RFK. They couldn't get a lease with, in Baltimore. They tried Annapolis. They tried, then he went to Norfolk. By then, Joe Wheeler, the owner's running out of money. So then Rami Loud bought him and then moved him to Orlando. You had Philadelphia, which was going to move to Portland, which was going to move to Mexico City, which was going to move. It was just crazy, and I made a list of all the different places, I mean, even like Bassett, he was starting out in Toronto until the government made a big fuss about, we don't want them coming in and encroaching our territory. You're going to cause the end of the CFL. And, so he couldn't fight City Hall. He went through, tried and thought about a dozen cities to go to. I mean, we're talking Miami, Green Bay, Syracuse, Buffalo, all these different cities that he thought about. And then by that time, Memphis had been turned down for an NFL franchise. Now they were looking for a WFL franchise. There we go. Light comes on with Bassett. He moves to Memphis. And by that time, Arnold was in Houston. And then he was there. But it was like, it was like that. They had teams that moved. And Davidson, again, it was just these guys, his buddies, his tennis pals, his guys from the WHA, the ABA. Here, you take this team, you take this team. And then, I think the first guy to sell his was Nick Maletti. He sold his to Tom Ariger from Chicago, I think 400,000. And all these guys sold all these. And the thing was, instead of putting all this money into like a kitty, like a fund to kind of get the league off the starting gate, the guys kept the money. I mean, you talk about 12 teams times like $500,000. You're talking $6 million that you got in reserve to when you had problems, you could do that. So, they kept the money, and some of the guys got front office jobs, some of the founders. And, but Davidson, I think he sold his, I don't know where his was. I'm sorry, I hit my table here. He had a franchise that he sold as well. And, he made himself commissioner, which I thought was a mistake. Very good promoter, not a good administrator, is my opinion. I think they needed a football guy in there. They needed somebody with some, experience. Names that were bandied about were Al Davis, Don Klosterman. Both those guys would have been great. Davis would have been especially great, I think. He was one of the guys that voted when they voted to add Memphis and Birmingham. He was one of the three that voted that they should add them back in 76 when they tried to apply for membership. But, Davidson was not an administrator. He said they tried stuff that they tried in the WHA that didn't work in a football team because you got smaller rosters in hockey. They tried to keep teams afloat when they should have just folded them earlier than they did. Detroit was one. Jacksonville, I know they folded, but they should have folded them. Just get them out, move them, do something, just make a decision. And I think that was probably on his part. Was probably again he did blame himself for a lot of this stuff. There was no vetting of owners. You had Bud Huckle in Detroit, who was some hospital administrator, and he wound up suing because he said that he was kicked out of the group that was going to own the team, probably for the better. But then you had that. You had guys like the Detroit. I mean, you had 33 owners. Technically, in my opinion, what the problem was, you had 33 investors. You didn't have that strong central figure. Every football team, every sports team has investors, minor investors, minority investors that come in and put a few bucks in or whatever. But you got that strong guy in the middle who's running the meetings, running the day-to-day operation, saying this is making the decisions. That's what happened with Detroit. You had 33 investors. They'd have meetings every Friday, and every Friday they'd go, what do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? And they wouldn't do anything. So these guys are suffering, the players, the staff, not getting paid, and there's no, nothing being done about it because there wasn't that person who wanted to take charge and run the thing. So, I think that was more, it was a joke around the league, of course, and I'm sure you guys have heard it. They had 33 owners and, and John Bassett said they had 33 guys who put 15 cents in. And, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if they're going to be in existence when we get up there to play them. So, but it was just the idea they had investors. They didn't have that strong guy at the helm. Esther Edwards did. She was the vice president of Motown Records. She started to have a little bit of time to get in there and spend some time with the team. And the team kind of stabilized for a while there in the spring of '74, but she just couldn't, devote her time to it. She's vice president of Motown Records. I mean, she's running a record company that's like huge at the time when we're getting big. You got Marvin Gaye, you've got Stevie Wonder, you've got all these acts, and she's trying to run that. She just didn't have the time or the inclination, I think, to run the team to be the majority owner. So you had that, and then, after a while, then, who's going to buy him? Upton Bell was going to buy him, moving to Charlotte. John DeLorean was going to buy him, keep him in Detroit. Dick Volpe, one of the co-owners, was going to move him to Louisville. So, all this stuff came along and, nothing ever happened. He just said, all right, we're just going to fold. And that's what happened.
Well,
same with Jackson. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Dave.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was at the end of the day, we've heard the stories of the failures, the failing teams is amazing. Were there any teams that were actually ownership groups that actually were doing a good job overall? I mean, the Hawaiians was a good story, but they ran out. Was there towards the end? Was there anybody who was left standing that could have stood, or was it all just let's get out of this as quick as possible?
No, there were a couple. Dave, and I think you got to start with John Bassett.
Yep.
He was a great owner. If they could have cloned him, that would really help the league. If they could have made about 10 John Bassetts, that league would probably still be in existence, or it would have merged anyway. He was great. Never missed a paycheck in '74. Him and Philadelphia, those were the two teams in '74 that didn't miss a paycheck. He did a great job, first class operation. Players owner, a guy who really, loved his players, loved the team, really was involved, had the money to back himself up, could make the claims. I'm going to start with, I'm going to sign Jim Kick, Larry Zonka, Paul Warfield. Went out and did it, made a lot of headlines. He was, to me, the best owner. I mean, if they're going to start a WFL Hall of Fame, and I've thought about it, he would be the first inductee, because he was really, everybody that I've talked to, all the players, all say first class operation, no problems, never a missed paycheck, never any problems with money or anything like that. So you got to start with him. I think another guy, and he was, again, still good in '75, right to the end. Bassett was. And he, like I said, he tried to get into the NFL, really made a concerted effort to get in the NFL. And he had John Bosacco from Philadelphia. Again, he was another one, didn't miss a paycheck in '74. I don't think he missed any in '75. He didn't, they had terrible attendance, but he paid everybody on time. Again, first class guy, everybody liked him. Very good with the, with the players, good owner. Just had no money as far as like in tickets and that kind of thing, and attendance was just, especially that second year, was just awful. When they played in Franklin Field, you thought they would have been doing better, but because JFK was just a dump at the time. And but I think those two, Birmingham, you got to look at. The only thing that hurt them, Bill Putnam signed all these future contracts. Kenny Stabler, Elstree Greenwood, Rayfield Wright, and I think it would wound up being like $1.5 million in bonuses alone, which would have helped him run his team. I realize you want to make headlines. They were good for the newspapers, the future contracts. Look who was coming next year or the year after. We're going to have this guy with us. Kenny Stabler is going to lead us to the World Bowl. He probably would have. But, they did that. And, that what hurt his team. I think they missed the last 5 paychecks on that team. But for the longest time, he was a good owner. But he just, overspent on those future contracts, I think was what hurt him. And I tell you, I don't know. I'm trying hard to think of anybody.
So many issues going along the way.
Yeah.
But I guess my other question would be along the lines of Davidson. Being this was his third attempt to start up a league. I mean, at the end of the day, was it naming himself commissioner, a way to keep himself around?
Well, probably, because then, right before he did that, he quit as the president of the WHA.
Yeah.
And, I think that was probably it. I think he wanted to, to be, I think that's probably a good analogy and a good way to look at it. I think that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to be in the limelight. Hey, look, I'm the commissioner of this thing. When he should have hired somebody with a little bit more, like the ABA hired George Mikan, and the old AFL hired Joe Foss, even though he wasn't a football guy. He was very, a lot of credibility, and people liked him. And like I said, if you'd have picked a football guy, even Upton Bell, they talked about Burt Bell Jr., but even like Upton Bell would have been a good guy to, to have at the head. But like you said, I agree with that. I think that's a good way to look at it, Dave. I really do. I think that he probably wanted to be in the limelight because this was his baby. This is, people make fun of it. He said, this was my best deal. And, best, of the 3. I don't know about that. That's what he says or said. But, I just think that, if you had a football guy there at the lead, maybe made him a something else in the league and stayed in it, maybe president while somebody else was commissioner. I think that would have helped him a lot.
So he was definitely a great salesman. He could, he could connect with somebody with money and just give him write a check to get in. Like
right.
It was amazing reading about him and just his ability to sit down and put this vision down and then go, yeah, I'm in here you go. It's amazing.
Yeah. No, he was. He was a go-getter. He was a guy who, like I said, he was in the ground floor on the ABA, WHA. They both lasted into the late 70s.
Yeah.
So you got to give him credit for that. You got to give him credit for raising salaries because the NFL had to start paying more money because of the fact they were signing these guys. So, I just think that if he would have just curbed his ego a little bit, not all the way, because like you said, he had his good points. He had his good way of being a salesman, being a promoter, getting those guys to buy into this thing. That's not easy to do. You're trying to find 12 guys who got enough money to get into something. You don't know if it's going to work. You don't know if it's going to last. You don't know if he's going to get off the ground, but he was able to convince these guys to do that. So he had that part of him, which was beneficial to the WFL. So, you can't look at him and just, like I said, sometimes make, he gets a lot of ridicule, which I think at times is unjustified, I think, because he did a lot of, positive things. The league had black ownership. The league had a black head coach in Willie Wood, a lot of black assistant coaches, had a black, what am I going to say? This is when you got to do your editing. No, it had a lot of black front office people. Women were involved. You had Dusty Rhodes there at the New York Stars. She was an assistant general manager, knew more than probably most of the other guys in the organization. And there was Diane Plotz, who was the GM for Hawaii in '74 toward the end. So you had a lot of forward-thinking people in the league, including Davidson. who was looking at this kind of thing and saying that, we're going to make a move that, you're going to look at things that, you haven't seen in the NFL. We're going to give opportunities to, I think the NFL had 2 black quarterbacks at the time, and the WFL had like 6 or 7. So, they had that idea of looking ahead instead of turning black quarterbacks into cornerbacks or wide receivers, which the NFL was still doing. You had, guys that they said, Matthew Reed from Birmingham. You had DC Nobles from Houston and Shreveport, and David Mays from Houston and Shreveport, and Eddie McCashin from Jacksonville, and Reggie Oliver from Jacksonville. So you had quite a few where the NFL, I think, had J.J. Jones and Joe Gilliam, I think, at the time, and maybe James Harris. So maybe it was 3. But they still had more of that. So it was forward thinking. I think some of that came from Davidson. You got to look at the guy was looking at, they didn't want just a football. They just didn't want a football. You had the yellow and the blue. Then it turned out to be the orange and the palomino. But like the player said, it was ours. It was something that was ours alone. Nobody could copy it. We had it. And this was our football. And a lot of them, after I think they came out and the ink, the paint was coming off, the dye was coming off in the players' hands. They were turning orange and palomino yellow there in the first couple games, especially when they sweated. But they, in the end, they all said this was ours. This was like the ABA basketball. This was ours. This was something that we had. NFL didn't have it. CFL didn't have it. They had all these different, what do you call it? Different prototypes. Looked at like with swirls around it, different color schemes, with laces on 2 sides so you could throw it from whenever you got the ball, the quarterback could throw it. So they were,
and they had the dicker rod too.
The dicker rod, it got a lot of heat again. What's his name? Alex Hawkins liked to ridicule it on the TVS games. But it was something different. I know they had to go back to the chains. And a couple of times it malfunctioned during games. They had to go to the chains in 74, I think once in Charlotte. But, again, it was something that was different. The colored coded pants, I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
That one was kind of crazy. But
all these years later, we're still talking about them. So it worked.
Yes. So it did. It got some publicity. Whether it was, what is it? Hollywood says there's no such thing as bad publicity.
Right.
So that's the thing, how Davidson thought. I think that's how he thought. I want our names in the paper. I want our league in the papers. I don't care what it is. People are going to talk about it. And like you said, Dave, we're still talking about it in 2024, 50 years later. So, it's amazing, but yeah, I just think that, like I said, you can't, like I said, he's an easy target, and he always has been because of how the league did and didn't do. But he did a lot of good things, and I think that if you just had somebody there, a football guy, to give him some credibility, some stability, I think that would have helped a lot.
Well, Mark, let me ask you in terms of what could have helped the league. Now, in the 1970s, for those people who are listening that don't kind of realize or remember or what have you, back in the early 70s, and I was a kid when, the World Football League came about. But when I was a kid, really the only way you could watch TV in the 70s was via an aerial antenna.
Right.
Cable wasn't prevalent, obviously, streaming. So the fact that the TV, the World Football League did not really have a TV deal, but they had TVS. Could you explain to everybody what, the TV aspect of the World Football League? Because to me, that's one of those things that when people are talking now about alternative football leagues, everybody's talking about distribution, how we can watch a game on TV.
Sure. Yeah. They wanted, they're not going to get the networks. The networks are tied up with the NFL, ABC, CBS, NBC. So they went to the Hughes Sports Network. I don't know if you guys remember that. They used to carry a lot of college basketball. Howard Hughes owned it. It was the Hughes Sports Network. I'm a little older than you guys, I think. I remember, these, you'd see like Montana State against, Valparaiso or something, and like at 11 o'clock at night. And so they went to them first. They were only going to offer them 50,000 a team, that's all they were going to pay. So then they went to TVS, which was, television sports was basically what TVS stood for. And they went a little bit higher. They went around 80 to 100,000, which is nowhere near what the NFL, you had 2 million a year, I think those teams made. But, you're kind of stuck with your choices. They went with TVS. At first, TVS, Eddie Einhorn was the president, guy that went on to own the Chicago White Sox and the Bulls. He was the president of TVS. And at first he said, because of the newness, because it was a novelty, it was a new thing, it was an easy sell at the beginning. They sold all the spots. They sold a lot of, to a lot of different sponsors. So it was an easy sell. They were happy with the results. I don't know how many stations. There was way over 100 stations that they wound up being on with TVS. And, they didn't do too bad. But again, the teams just didn't get a lot of money out of it. But you're kind of stuck. So after that season, though, TVS was willing. They had an option year for the second year in 75. So they decided at first they were going to re-up. They were going to do another year. And then Hemmeter made the announcement at April, which really wasn't a secret. They've been pursuing him since like 73. They were going to sign Joe Namath. They were going to bring Joe Namath in, play for Chicago. This was the big thing. We're going to get him. He's going to be here. He's going to be the thing. And Eddie Einhorn walked up to Hemmeter after that. He said, "You just shot yourself in the foot. Because if you don't get Namath, you're going to look bad and nobody's going to come to the games." And sure enough, that's what happened. Joe went back and forth. He was up to over 400,000. It was like a 40-page contract that he was working on. Like a lot of players that were getting offers from the WFL, are you serious about it, or are you using it as kind of leverage to get a better deal from your NFL team? I mean, it happens. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, anybody's going to do it, So they went back and forth. And then I learned recently that he was really looking at, because he was going to sign a big deal with Fabergé. And he had to be in New York, to do the Beauty Miss Pantyhose and all the shaving stuff. And that's what basically killed the deal, besides the fact that he said at the end, when he looked like he was going to sign, he said, "All right, if we get TV, I want 15%. Well, the WFL said, "Well, we can't do that." Not thinking 85% of something is better than no percent of nothing. Hey, let Joe have his 15%. We still got 85%. So no, we can't do that. Joe went back to the Jets. And that was, a lot of people, thought that was pretty much the end whenever he didn't sign. I think Joe would have, I don't know how good he would have done. He'd have put a lot of fannies in the seats, as they say. I mean, obviously they'd done a lot better in Chicago than he did. And they were also going to sign Walter Payton. They really went after him. What's his name? Eugene Polano, who was the owner, met with him, offered him the world, apartment, car, all kind of money. Walter looked at the guy and he said, "Boy, I like that ring." He goes, "Oh, you do?" It was a Chicago Bear ring. And he said, "Here, you can have it." Takes it off his finger, gives it to Walter, but in the end, he signed. I mean, you think about Joe Namath and Walter Payton on the same team with John Gilliam at wide receiver. I mean, they had to be better than they were. So, but Joe, he I don't know, was he using again as leverage to get a better deal from the Jets? Who knows? Was he serious about it? Who knows? He had been pursued for about a year and a half before that. He was going to be an owner and play for a team. He was just going to be a player. They were talking to him because he was going to be a free agent May 1st, 75. So they've been talking to him for quite a while. But, I think that really killed the Chicago franchise, because what did they? I don't know how many people. It was like a couple of thousand in Soldier Field. And, the Fire had done pretty well, and, I think that, they started out with 42,000. The Winds started out with like 2,000 in their first game. And, but I think that the Fire had a better owner. You were talking earlier about good owners there, Dave. And, I think Ryder, you'd have to add one. He was a pretty good owner, didn't overspend. Players, he would bring them in to talk to him. I think John Brockington from the Packers brought him in, see if, he'd sign. He asked for too much. He said, I'm not going that high. Thanks a lot, but no thanks. And he didn't, and he got tired. What happened with him was he lost his energy for the league because he kept being told he had to pay for everybody else's mistakes. Here, we want to give money to Detroit. We want to give money to Jacksonville. He said, I get tired of, I'm trying to run my own team, and now I'm being asked to prop up these teams. So I think toward the end, and his team, they had a rash of injuries. I mean, Virgil Carter was having a great year. Mark Keller was having a great year at running back. James Scott was a great wide receiver. Their defense was terrible. They kept bringing guys in on a weekly basis. They fired their defensive coordinator like halfway through the season, brought some other guy in. He took a look and left. They just completely fell apart, lost their last 10 games, and he didn't play the last game. So, but while he was there and while he was running the team, not being asked to prop up other teams, and losing his energy, losing his, intensity, losing his desire to be an owner, like anybody I think would if you're asked to not only run your own team but also give other people money just for their mistakes. He, toward the end, then he wanted nothing to do with it. So, and he kicked it. I think he helped kick Davidson out. I think there at the end of October, he had that bloodless coup, I guess you could call it. And it was him and maybe a couple other guys. I think they'd had enough of Davidson. So even though he was still on the board of the Southern California Sun after that, which I never understood that. It was like Larry Hatfield I think he got convicted for fraud for, falsifying records when he got the loans, and he was still in the league the next year. It's like, I mean, I realize any publicity is good publicity, but you got to draw a line somewhere.
Yeah, federal conviction kind of draw it.
Yeah.
You would think, but
Yeah,
yeah.
I don't know.
If your dues are paid, they said, "Oh, okay."
I guess that's how they look at it.
Well, it reminds me of the old Animal House quote, "Hey, we need the dues."
Yeah, that's true. That's a good one.
Well, there was one guy, right. and you had just mentioned him, who did pay his dues, and that was John Bassett.
Yeah.
And when the World Football League had all these plans to go out, like you said, mentioned Joe Namath, Daryl LaMonica, another big name but there were three big names that went to the World Football League who, Larry Zonka, Paul Warfield, and Jim Kick.
Right.
Let me ask you, and I can't remember off the top of my head, the reason why I'm asking, but have you gotten a chance to talk to all three, sit down with all three about the leagues, about the World Football League?
No, I wish I could have. Yeah.
I know our mutual friend Tim Hanlon sat down with Larry Zonka. I think it was last year. And Larry does talk about the World Football League in there. What was the impact of that signing with obviously John Bassett had money, had cold card cash. These guys were getting paid. But the impact when that signing was made, what was it like back then in the football world? What was the reaction?
It was huge news. It was Time Magazine. It was Sports Illustrated, newspapers all over the country. It was just a huge story. And, Art Modell said when the USFL was coming in, he said, we're not going to do the same mistake that we did when the WFL came in. We panicked. And I think the NFL owners panicked a little bit when that happened because it looked like these guys mean business. These guys are signing three of the biggest names on one of the best teams in history. And they're coming into their league. What are we going to do about this? Then the next thing you know, Stabler's signing, Craig Morton signing, and all these guys are signing. It's like they've got put on alert, and I think it was a big deal. It really was. The headlines were the deal that shocked sports, and everybody was talking about it. I think that, and I really think that the NFL panicked a little bit when they started signing, then they started getting restraining orders, starting to sue. You can't take our players, and this, that, and the other thing. Paul Brown was a big on that when they signed Bill Bergey. He just had a fit. Tex Schramm with the Cowboys, when they started getting players signed, they tried to get restraining orders. And it was a big deal. I think that the NFL really felt some heat. They knew they had a strike coming up in 74. They were worried about that. They didn't know how long it was going to last. They had no idea whether it was going to be a whole season or not. It set things back a little bit. And meanwhile, the WFL is making news, making headlines, and I really think that the NFL, like Modell said, they panicked that time. They weren't going to do it again. But at that time, I think they did, because they really thought these guys got some money, like Bassett did. He had money. He had his, the money to back him up. And he, went out and he was going to do something. He was going to make a splash somewhere, and he made a big one. So I think the NFL guys just kind of got put on high alert, and it was a big deal. I think it was a lot bigger deal than probably the NFL will admit now. But I thought it was. I thought it was a huge deal.
And you can tell they learned a lot from when the USFL came through, because it seemed they didn't have that same aggressive nature. It was almost like it almost seemed, after seeing from the World Football League, the USFL, it was almost like, okay, spend your money. Let's see how long you can last, because we don't think you're going to last. Go ahead, waste your money. We'll still be here.
Right. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think you got it right on the nail on the head, Dave, because I think that's what they did. They kind of sat back and said, okay, sign Doug Flutie, sign Herschel Walker. Let's see if you can make it, see if you're going to have the attendance, see if you're going to make the money. The good thing about, the USFL was, of course, they had ESPN and ABC, and that helped them a lot. So, I think that there was two different situations. And I think that, they learned from that. The NFL did. Hey, let's just kind of back off, see what happens, not like freak out on this.
And it was so close to the AFL NFL merger. Like, it was so close. It was like, well, we just underestimated these group of guys.
Right.
Let's not let this. And then by the time another 10 years comes along, going, yeah, we're good, guys. We'll see you later.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too. I think it was a very good point. There was still a lot of hard feelings, from the merger and from the AFL, from the war. And, it's like, here it is 4 years later and somebody else is coming along. What are we going to, are we going to, so, and like I said, and I think the NFL was kind of worried because they had the strike. They knew the strike was coming. And nobody knew how long it was going to last. Was it going to last the whole season? They're going to have to cancel games? They had no idea. So I think that helped their idea of really panicking and saying, oh, we better do something about this. So it's a completely different mindset from, like you said, 10 years. They said, let's see what they do. So.
Well, Mark, let me ask you, when it comes to, you mentioned in there about learning the lessons, and with the World Football League, how much, you get me on Facebook reaching out to you for an interview, and we've been Facebook friends for years and everything.
Right.
But when it comes to the business aspect currently, do you ever hear anybody in the press, on the radio, on the TV ever mention the World Football League when it comes to, say, the NFL right now? You've got, now we're down to one spring league popping up. But even when the USFL of the 80s came up, how much was talked about with the lessons learned from the World Football League? How much do you see out there? Because honestly, I don't see anything.
I'm with you. I don't see. Most everybody talks about the USFL, the 80s USFL. Nobody really talks about the WFL anymore. And, I think it gets lost in the shuffle. I don't like to see that. But there's no conversation about the WFL, what they did. So that's why guys like me and Richie Franklin and several other guys, Richie started the WFL project, which is on Facebook now. After he saw heard that they took the other leagues display out of the Hall of Fame. He was upset about that. Wrote to him, called them. Where's this at? Why is this not in here? So he didn't give him a very good answer. So he said, I'm going to start my own WFL project. And that's what we've been doing it now since August, I think. And
is it because of the lack of footage? Like the USFL just seems like it's just never gone away, even though it's 40 years ago, because there's so many games. Like you could spend months watching games on YouTube. So it, in essence, really never went away if you really wanted to look for it. But the World Football League, it just seems to have so few games out there, or to see it's almost
a lot of grainy footage.
Yeah, it's almost like folklore.
Yeah.
Then it's like it just seems like that. Like to me, it's fascinating. I love it. It's an amazing period of time in professional football, but it's so hard to find anything in video wise, which is like the way everything works today.
Yeah, no, I know. And you're absolutely right. It was kind of like the early ABA that kind of got lost in the shuffle where there's nothing about it. You've got like Greg, like you said, there's like this grainy footage, some highlight shows, that kind of thing. You don't see maybe parts of a game. I see them on, the guys in the WFL project kind of post those every once in a while. But yeah, you're right. You had, I remember ESPN Classic there. I guess that station's not around anymore, unfortunately.
No, apparently not. It's one of those that just kind of fell by the wayside with YouTube.
Yeah. I loved it. Like you could watch USFL games like 2, 3, 4 hours, and because they had the games. ESPN aired them, so they had that in their library. Whereas, TBS, I don't know if any of those kept them.
And it's TV, and it's TV, V as in Victor S, not TBS as Turner Broadcasting.
Right. Yeah, it's TBS. Yeah.
I always got that confused. I'm like, wait a minute, I don't remember. I know when I was a kid, like TV. Yeah, I don't remember it growing. But that just shows you too with the World Football League the impact of television.
Yeah.
At least the impact of television, the impact of having a television contract. Because, like you said, obviously the original the USFL, because the other one that came down the road, I never really considered the USFL, but they had a contract on ABC. Hell, they had Howard Cosell. I mean, it was considered at the time a legitimate league, and you could watch games. But with the World Football League, if you can only find one game a week on the UHF channel, and depending upon where you live at,
right,
it's just in a short span of time, just how much the media landscape had shifted, and also too the growth and power of the NFL.
Yeah. Oh, sure. I mean, I know they've got these spring leagues here now. I'm not really into them. I haven't been since probably the USFL, I think, was the last really one I paid attention to. Because the NFL is now 24/7, 365. You got the NFL Network. Now the season back in the 70s, the Super Bowl was played in early January. Now we're up to middle of February. Then you go right into the draft. Then you go right into the OTAs. Then you go, and there's no off season anymore. And I think that's what helped the USFL in the 80s was that, and the WFL to an extent, you had an off season.
Right.
I mean, I was a kid. You watched the Super Bowl. I didn't care about anything until the first game in September. I didn't care about the draft or anything like that, or OTAs, which didn't even exist at the time, or, combine, they had all this, and they have this stuff now. And it's like people flock to this combine, and the OTAs, and, you got the fantasy football, which wasn't was just basically getting started in the 80s and wasn't even around that much in the 70s. So you've got this juggernaut now, unless you got like some kind of a widespread gambling scandal, the NFL's here to stay. I mean, it's the 300-pound elephant in the corner. It's never going to go away.
It's become too big. Nobody's ever going to beat it. The days, I
No.
think, me personally, and talking about the spring leagues, because we've been in recent episodes, we've been talking more of the new spring league that's been out. But I'm kind of like you when it comes to it's like, yeah, that's nice you have it there, but like you, man, my hardcore interest in spring football ended with the USFL.
Right.
And to me, that approximately 10-year period was kind of the golden age, I think, for football fans, because you had the NFL in the 70s, which the NFL in the 70s, for anybody who didn't grow up in the 70s or wasn't alive, to me, that was the best, because it just was.
Yeah.
I don't even know. There's some great books. Michael McCambridge just wrote a great book about the sports in the 70s. Joe Zagorski has written a great book about, but that was the golden age, and it carried over into the 80s. But the NFL has become too big, and I agree with you. It's constant. It's and a lot of it has to do with the technological changes that have happened in our lifetime.
Like you said, streaming and all this other stuff going on, and the idea that you've got the NFL Network, it never leaves your consciousness. It never leaves the public consciousness at all the whole time. Like I said, there's no off season. The Super Bowl is now, in mid-February. You got the combines, you got all that stuff, and people pay attention. If you're starting your training camp for a spring league in February, nobody's going to care. The Super Bowl's on. Nobody's going to care.
Right.
So, and I think they have gotten too big. I don't know if anybody's ever going to beat them or not. I don't know if it's ever. I think that everything at some point comes to an end. I don't know if they will.
But the thing is, I guess two things. With the spring leagues, if they can do 1% of what the NFL does in money, we're all making money. Like it's one of those things where it's like, when you're looking at the astronomical billions that the NFL is making in the spring league, if they can do 1%, I think everyone's going to be happy. Everyone's going to get paid.
Right.
And going back to the World League, what I liked about the WFL was, and I do remember 70s football, and what I liked about the World Football League was it opened it up.
Yeah.
They tried to open it up, and it wasn't about the 3 yards and a cloud of dust. And they were giving, just like the ABA. That's the one thing I loved about the ABA is let the players play, open up the game, let them show their personality, let them show how the game can be played, almost like a continuation of the American Football League. It was just so much more from the highlights and from the reading. It's just go out there and play football. Was it pretty? Not all the time, but it wasn't the NFL model where it seemed like every single team played the exact same style. And it was just who was going to slug it out better than everybody else.
Right. Oh, yeah. I mean, the first football game I watched was in November of '69. It was the Jets and the Chiefs. And I was 11 years old. Fell in love with the Chiefs because they had red pants. I just thought that was for 11-year-old, that was the coolest thing, And, and I like Joe Namath. And it was a good game. And I didn't stop watching it till early 2000s. I mean, but the 70s to me, I'm with you guys. It was a hard hitting game. It was tough. You had really a lot of great players. You had, muddy games. You had rainy games. You had snow games. You had, teams that just hit and, not, borderline dirty sometimes, but it was a hard-hitting league. It was tough. It was 3 yards of cloud of dust, like you said. But again, like you said, and I agree, the WFL came along. Let's put a receiver only has to have 1 foot in bounds when he catches a pass. Let's open up the offense. Let's make sure the kickers don't dominate like they have been. Let's open up the game. Let's throw the ball. Let's see what we can do. They had the bell with King Cochran and Waller, all these wild formations and stuff. And some of the other teams did the same thing. So, and I think that just carried over to, San Diego Chargers with Coryell with all the offense. And I know that they had the Mel Blount rule, in the late 70s that changed the passing game. But I think it was still fairly, into the 80s, I would say. I mean, I watched it and I was still watching it when I was in college in the 80s. And, but that was my favorite era too. It was mine. I love the books about it. Like some of you mentioned, there was Hell with the Lid Off.
I just finished that one.
And the Raiders, great book.
Oh, awesome.
And, some of the other ones about, the Raiders of that era, the Madden Raiders.
I just completed like last month. I went on an Oakland Raiders spree, 70s Oakland Raiders spree. So yeah, no, it's just, I'm smiling as you're mentioning, like, I got done with that one too. So it's, but yeah, that was the magic, I mean, for lack of a better term, kind of like, I don't know, for us guys, somebody would probably say when men were men. I mean, back then the guys were, played the game, were kind of, pretty much, I mean, the NFL was a working class league. I mean, these guys had to have second jobs in the off season. I remember Bob Greasy, I think, sold real estate and, I mean, I could go on the list of guys, other second jobs, but it was before the money became really, really big.
Right.
And also too, I think before, again, I'm not trying to make any statement at all, but the NFL has become more and more entertainment. And we know that, Sonny Werblin's wife once said to Joe Namath, football is just show business. And which it always has been. But I think, and again, we're older too. We're old guys. So we, we remember that fondly. But I think also too, at least me, I don't really get too worked up about the way the game is now because technology has changed. The world has changed.
Yeah.
But I'm like you. I would, if I given a choice between watching the Super Bowl and watching, let's just say my first Super Bowl 11, I'm going to watch Super Bowl 11.
Sure. I do the same thing in a second. Yeah, the first one I watched was Super Bowl 4 with the Chiefs and the Vikings. And, the field was muddy. It was down in New Orleans and what was it, the Tulane Stadium. And, it was just a different era, different time, but it was great. And, it's like music, at least I think so anyway. The music you listen to as a kid and as a young teenager is the music that sticks with you. Right. You may like some of this stuff now. You may like some of the movies now, but everything makes an indelible mark on you in your teenage years. And I think that's the way with all sports, basketball, hockey, baseball, I mean, I still watch baseball. I still watch hockey, but, basketball, I can't watch anymore. I used to love to watch it. But, you had the ABA with that ball and some of the great players they had, but, the NFL, like you said, the money comes first now. You got to protect the shield. You can't have crazy guys like you see the shot of Ted Hendricks with that mask on the sidelines with that big smile on the mask's face. You don't see that. Kenny Staber with a big smiley face on the back of his helmet. That kind of stuff I miss. I really miss that kind of stuff. I saw a couple guys posting about Conrad Dobler and his left hand. He was sitting on, and it looked like this club, like this big, like it was like this big. How did that guy get into the game? And the Raiders would say they would check you before the game, but then you'd go into the locker room and put this stuff on.
Well, the old adage is if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying.
Right. But I couldn't believe the size of this guy. It was a club on it, and they talk about Bob Brown, who had a broken thumb for like 8 years, and he had this huge cast on his thumb, and he would just, drive it into some guy's stomach and knock him back. It was just a different time, but it's almost, I mean, I miss it. And it's like mythical to me.
Yeah,
You know,
I grew up in Buffalo, and I never want to go back and watch any of those Super Bowls ever again. I'm good. I am perfectly fine moving into the present.
I can understand that.
I'm all set. I mean, even going back to the 70s, and this is the thing, is like the 70s. The only thing I would talk about with the 70s is it's before free agency. It was still when, if you sign somebody, you sign them for life. Mm-hmm. So the good teams at the end of the 60s were good throughout the 70s because you weren't going anywhere.
Right.
And it was, I mean, growing up in Buffalo, I mean, O.J. Simpson in that running game was just amazing. And I like Joe Ferguson. He had great moments. But when you look back at those old box scores and you see 7 passes, 8 passes, 5 passes,
right,
and you're running OJ 48 times a game, you're not winning a whole lot because no one's expecting Ferguson to throw a pass. So you just crowd it. And if they had just a little bit, then nothing against. I mean, I wasn't the coach. Obviously, they had a game plan. They were going to run to win because that's what you did. But just any kind of just 15 passes, just opened up a little bit what could have been. There were some really good Bills teams in the 70s that just couldn't get past Miami, couldn't get past. Like, it was just tough to watch. It was just tough to follow. And then you get to the 90s, I'm like, yeah, I'm all set. Like, just I'm good.
Yeah. No, I've got I'm in the Western New York PFRA chapter, and there's a lot of Bills fans in that chapter, and I hear a lot of the same things. You know, they are diehard Bills fans. There's eras that they don't want to talk about, those Super Bowls, and so I know what you mean. So, but you know, like I said, 70s, early 80s. I was a big Joe Montana fan, still am. I just loved watching Joe. He was just one of those guys that. You know, I remember Dwight Clark saying, he said he was just so small. He looked like a punter. He said he must be the new punter, you know? And it was like, Joe just, you know, he was in there, and you give him like 10 seconds, he'll beat you. You know, I saw him against the Bengals.
Joe just had something about him, and I remember watching him when he played for Notre Dame. There was something about, even me as a kid, knowing, okay, this guy's going to be a star someday.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, I mean, he was a 2nd-round draft pick. I mean, it wasn't like I think he was a 2nd-round draft pick, if I'm not mistaken.
It was not very high. I know that.
Yeah.
I'll tell you right
and that was part of that era with the 70s and, you know, going into but, you know, as, you know, talking about football, I mean, to us, I mean, Dave and I are huge CFL fans. Do you get a chance to watch any CFL?
Oh, yeah. I love the CFL. Okay. I love to watch the CFL.
Because to me, that's still very much, that's like the last of the old school leagues.
I think it is. I agree. And that's why I think the 3 of us probably like to watch it, because it's more not the money. It's just, you know, you're talking about, you know, loyalties to teams like Hamilton, Winnipeg, and all that kind of thing. You know, they play no matter what the weather because they have to. It's in Canada.
Right.
And, you know, the money is not a big factor. So I agree with you 100%. I love watching it when they come on and they start wherever they're at. I try to tune them in.
Yeah.
You know, because I like it. I like the CFL. I always, you know, I remember I don't know, you guys probably remember the old Street and Smiths.
Oh, football. Yeah. Right at the end of the
they
back.
had the CFL.
The very back. There was
the very back had the CFL. You had all the guys like the imports, you know, and, you know, they even had the WFL. They had the WFL when in 74 and 75, they had articles about it in the Street and Smith. So I've got 68 to probably early 80s. I've got every issue.
Wow.
I love that magazine. And I've just been going around to secondhand stores and, you know, flea markets, and you can grab them for fairly cheap.
You know what? Now that you mention it, because obviously being over here, there's no place I can find those. But on the Internet Archive, a lot of people have uploaded and, you know, and done PDF versions of it. So that might be my project today. Might be going and looking through some of those old Street and Smiths. Because, I mean, that's the 3 of us. We like living in the past, and just because we're all historians and, you know, being a podcast or being like you, who's got, you know, countless books now. I mean, like I said, I've got them all right here, but I got so many of yours that I couldn't even tell you how many I got.
Well,
And
I appreciate that. Like I
oh,
said
you're
before,
welcome.
Greg, I
You're
really do.
welcome. And so with the PFRA and the World Football League project, could you tell us, is the World Football League project part of what the PFRA is doing right now, or is it a kind of like a side quest or some? Go ahead and explain. Sorry.
Oh, the WFL project that's on
Yeah.
Facebook, you mean? Yeah, that's a grassroots thing with Richie. Richie started
Okay.
that up, and there's 10 of us that's in it that are either collectors or historians. And we post on there. I mean, it's called the WFL project. If you haven't joined it, by all means do so, because we talk about a lot of stuff. There's guys with collections of, I mean, just huge collections of stuff. There's this one guy who has like equipment bags from like every team. I mean,
It's
some of these
amazing what
guys
I've
are,
seen on that site.
yeah,
I've seen on
and
that
it's
page.
just, and you got researchers. I do a today in the WFL every day. What happened on this day, whatever the year it was, and I do that every day. I run a Blazers page, Florida Blazers page. That's just mine. I'll, again, whatever happens on the day that occurred, with the Blazers. Yeah, it's really not with the PFRA. Richie was in the PFRA. I guess he still is. He thought he dropped out, but I guess he still is. Because I said, "Are you still in the PFRA?" Oh, yeah. So, but yeah, it's just a grassroots thing. We got, a lot of former players. We've got a lot of former
Right.
coaches. We've got cheerleaders. We've got fans. We've got, I mean, a lot of different players. Like Bob Gladjoe just joined up from the Stars. He played for the Patriots. Um, I, the one guy I wish I would have written a book about the WFL was Tom Beer. I don't know. You
Yeah.
guys probably read his book. I wish he was going to write a book. He was talking about it there when the league ended. They were talking to him, and he said, I should write a book about it, because he had written that Sunday's Fools, which is one of my favorite books. And I wish he'd have written a book. But a lot of people, they're just a great bunch of people. It really is. I mean, we enjoy hanging out. There's usually not too many. We kind of screen people when they come in. I think you got to do that anymore.
Yeah, you do. You
You
really
do.
do. Yeah,
I
we've
mean,
got a page. Yeah.
I'm in a Turner Classic Movies site that just, people, if you don't like somebody's movie, they're all over you like stink on a monkey.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
it's like, come
Yeah.
on. It's not our problem is that we don't, it's not that we disagree. It's that we can't understand why we disagree. So many
Right.
people can't just, why don't you like that movie? It's because I don't,
Yeah. Or
I just,
just let it go. Just
yeah,
let it go.
just
Yeah.
scroll, just keep scrolling,
Yeah. Yeah.
But people can't do that. So, so we do that. And I've got one for the Central Pennsylvania Whitetail Bucks, which I love doing that book. I interviewed a lot of guys from the team because they were from my area. I lived down in Central Pennsylvania, and they were in there when I was in high school, and just a great bunch of guys. I remember the first time I met them, and there was, I think, 8 or 9 of them, and they just all started talking and telling stories. And I just sat there, I'm right, and they said, finally, after about an hour, they're like, "Are you going to ask us any questions?" And I said, "No, you're just telling your stories. I'm just writing it down." So anyway, but yeah, so the WFL is just, it always has and always will fascinate. I still find little snippets and little tidbits when I'm doing research that I go down a rabbit hole and I'm seeing this and I'm seeing this. Now the last couple of days I've been researching that HBO carried the games in 74 and 75. HBO was just starting out. It's kind of started out in 73, and it hooked up with Sterling Manhattan Cable. And it joined up with them, and they ran their cables under New York City because they had lost their power so often with the storms and everything in New York City that they ran them through the tunnels. So HBO started out as just like a premium channel,
Right.
$6-7 a month. And they decided they had, they made contracts with individual teams, and they had all the New York teams, obviously, because it was basically located in New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. And you had like 23,000 subscribers. So it was small, but they ran games for the better part of like July, August, September, and into early October. And then when the Yankees, because they had a contract with the Yankees, they had a contract with the Knicks and the Rangers. When they started up and the pennant started up, pennant races, then HBO would just preempt the WFL and go to whatever. Okay, we got the Rangers on tonight. To heck with the WFL. And then in early '75, they said they were thinking about doing it again, airing the WFL games. Didn't make a lot of money for the league, but it was out there getting exposure. And by '75, then they had gone satellite, and most of the games they did in '75 were Memphis, obviously, because he had Zonka kicking Warfield. So most of those games were involved Memphis at some point. And whereas '74 was all the New York Stars and the Philadelphia Bell home games, because that was where the company was located with Pennsylvania, New York, and Jersey. So that's the games they got then. And but in '75 they carried quite a few again. But yeah, that was interesting, just finding that out. And then I found out a little tidbit that in the game in '74, I think it was the Wheels and the Stars. They had a woman do color commentary, Barbara Sheehan, who was the first woman to do color commentary on a football game on TV. And it had Jane Chastain. I don't know if you remember her or not from the '70s. She had done a game as a guest announcer in the WFL in like August. And she was the first woman to actually sit in the booth. So you had stuff like that happened. The HBO did. I'd heard over the years that HBO had carried some of the games, and they did. And it's on the schedule.
So you thought it sounded like it was probably like, it sounds like an urban legend. But
yeah,
then,
I mean, at the time I thought that's what it was.
Yeah.
Oh no, HBO, come on. What are they? But they have got their big full page ad. Here's the movies we're showing this month. We've got ABA, NBA basketball. We got the Yankees. We got the Rangers. We got the Knicks, and we got the World Football League.
Wow.
And there's a picture of, I think, Anthony Davis running against Memphis in there, and they did, and they had a schedule where they were showing what game they would show that week in '74. And yeah, it was something that I, had nothing to know, didn't know anything about, except like you said, it was an urban legend. Somebody's making this up. No, but they did. So I found that out. Jane Chastain and Barbara Sheehan both were in a booth. Again, in the WFL. Dave Williams, the wide receiver for the Southern California Sun, was the first athlete to have arthroscopic surgery on his knee. Nobody had ever had it done before. It was September of '75. 2 days he was on the practice field, and he played that week.
Wow.
And it was WFL. It was history in the making. The guy who did it had done it before with regular, his regular patients. He was the first athlete. So again, this is something that happened in the WFL that I'm hoping to bring to the forefront, that people remember this stuff, as well as that we talked about earlier, some of the negatives, some of the bad stuff. And, you have to include that, because they lost $30 million in a year and a half, which I think comes out to like $170 million now in 2023 dollars, I think. So, but there was a lot of positives, and there was a lot of things that happened that should be, noted and should be kept noteworthy. That you had women in the front office, you had a lot of black ownership, you had black head coaches, black assistant coaches, you had women in the front office, you had women in the broadcast booth. You had a guest in an announce booth, and then ESPN was doing that like 20 years later. They would have like, a guest announcer in ESPN NFL games. The WFL did that in the '70s, and you had McLean Stevenson, you had Burt Reynolds, you had Dick Butkus, you had all these different. Jack Kemp was in it. For you, Dave, Jack Kemp was in one. Was at one of the games. So, they did a lot of things. And I think we touched on this earlier about the forward-looking thinking that they did. They did things a lot sooner than other, the NFL did, or the USFL maybe did.
And they brought pro football to cities that had never experienced pro football. Obviously Hawaii, going out to Hawaii, Charlotte, when Upton brought the Star, because off the top of my head, I can't remember, did Upton bring the Stars down, or did the Stars? I can't remember off the top. I talked to Upton a couple weeks ago. I can't remember.
I think what he did was he bought the team. I don't know if he ever got his money from Robert Schmertz, the guy who owned the Celtics and he owned the Stars. It was like $700,000 he was supposed to get. Yeah. I don't know if he got like so much on the dollar or what. I never found that information. But he brought him down there to Charlotte. You had Jacksonville. You got the Jaguars now. You got the Panthers there, like you said, in Carolina. San Antonio has been in the CFL, the CFL America. The Hawaiians, again, I think the travel was the only reason why you don't have that. But, they did. They brought, again, a lot of things that were ahead of its time that people, I think, forget about. And I think that that's one of my goals and one of my aims on my books is to make sure that people don't forget these things. Because it can happen. Like you said, there's no game footage. There's nothing like the ESPN has the USFL. So, it's almost like a legend, like an urban legend, like a mythical thing that did it really happen? Who knows in another 20, 30, 40 years? I mean, hopefully it will.
Well, unfortunately, too, the World Football League does live on. And Dave and I are both simulation sports geeks. And Mark, I know you and I talked about this, offline, probably maybe a month or two ago.
Yeah.
You've got on the computer, the great thing about the one thing about the age we live in now is, guys like us, you know what? I'm tired of, let me go play. Let me see how, let me go play simulation sports, because there's a whole subculture of older guys like us that love to play these games that we grew up with. And I know with Second and 10, the program Second and 10, and also Action PC Sports, they have World Football they have World Football League seasons. And the great thing about the Second and 10 one is they got all the helmets, they got all the logos, and they got all the stats. So it's fun to see how. But then you can mix and match and see how King Corcoran would have done against Joe Namath, who he played with for the cup of coffee he had with the Jets.
Yeah.
So, well, Mark, on that, yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say one more thing was that another thing I just popped into my head while we're talking is that they use the colored face masks. I think they were one of the first leagues to do that. With the Bell had the blue ones. Who else? I mean, I think Jacksonville had silver. But they used the face masks of different colors.
Okay.
Whereas the NFL just had the gray, and now they all do it. So again, things
that's one of those little things I never thought about. I'm like, yeah, you're right. I forgot about that. I didn't even realize that.
So, a lot of things that you can remember it for that aren't negative, a lot of positives, a lot of things that were ahead of its time.
Right. All right.
Yeah.
Well, listen, gents, on that note, let's wrap everything up. Mark, before we let you go here, and obviously we're going to have you stay on the line here for a little bit after we hit the stop button, but how can people find, first of all your books and buy your books, and also find you, my guess is probably social media wise, you hang out there on Facebook with the various World Football League pages that you do.
Yeah. The books are through St. Johann Press in New Jersey, little small mom and pop outfit, but they're great people. I've worked with Dave now for 18 years. He's the publisher, and he's a great guy. Amazon has all my books on it. You can find them there. If you order through the order through Amazon. If you mention St. Johann Press and the website where Richie has his books, he has his old website that he still maintains. And if you mention it, you get free shipping.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, and so yeah, I mean that's how you get them. And I think they're still selling. I don't get a whole lot of money from it. I don't do it for the money. I'm no J.K. Rowling or Tolkien or anybody like that or Stephen King. I'd love to be, but you get what you get, and I just do it for the sheer enjoyment of it.
Well, and also too, I'm thinking about it because I love libraries. I'm just a library geek.
Oh yeah,
and
too.
Just you think about it, you're gonna when we're all both all of us are gone, your books are still gonna live on. So and the other thing too is you've covered a period of history nobody else has really covered it. So
yeah,
that's how I like. So that's why when we've done these podcasts with authors in the past, I kind of go fanboy. So it's your turn now.
Well, yeah, and that's what my publisher writes about. He likes slice of life books. He goes, I don't need another Yankees book. There's 175 Yankees books out there. He wants something that's here and now gone.
Right.
That it's a slice of life, something that was there, piece of history. He loves that kind of thing. And
it kind of captures the era. You're sitting there, you're reading it, and takes you right back to when you were a kid.
Yeah, and a lot of times I will put like current events at the time, incorporate them in the narrative in my books.
Right.
Because I think that's just sets a tone, gets people in, like you said.
Those to me are the best books because as a kid growing up, I mean, I wasn't the greatest student in school, but I loved history, but I also loved sports.
Right. Yeah.
What better way to learn, about history than through sports? But like you said, including what was going on outside the stadium at the time. So yeah. So for everybody listening, we're going to include links to, where to buy Mark's books, and hopefully, we'll get some more sales for you out of this podcast. And with that said, I'm very hopeful you will put this podcast on your Facebook webpage, the Facebook page for the WFL and for the Blazers, and
be glad
get it out there so more people can hear you. And Mark, thank you very much for sitting down with us. It's been an honor and a pleasure, and I know for David has too. And we will talk more on the flip side here after I press the stop button. But for everybody who has been listening, thank you very much for tuning in. We will be back next week. Fran, hopefully we'll have Fran phoning in from wherever he's traveling at with our Sports Central to give us an update as to what's going on in the wide world of minor league sports. On behalf of David and myself and Mark, thank you very much for listening, and we will be talking to y'all soon. Bye-bye.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.